Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with cornbread pancakes with fresh strawberry syrup. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make the lightest, the fluffiest, the most delicious, and clearly the best cornmeal pancake of all time. And yes, I'm calling these cornbread pancakes and not cornmeal pancakes, since those are usually dense and flat and gritty. And these are none of those things, thanks to one top secret, but very simple trick. And to get started, the first thing we'll want to do is make our fresh strawberry syrup, which begins by washing a pound of the best strawberries we can find. And then what we'll do is take a small sharp knife and we'll go ahead and cut off the green tops by just cutting around with the tip held at about a 45-degree angle, which is one way to do it. Another way is just to cut straight across the top like this, which does the same thing, you just lose a little more strawberry. But either way, we'll go ahead and hull, as we call it in the business, 1 pound. And toss those into a saucepan. And sure, if we wanted to, we could cut those bigger ones in half, but we don't really have to, since as you'll see in a few moments, these are all going to cook down and get really soft. So we can just leave those all whole if we want. But I had a knife in my hand, and I do enjoy cutting things, so I did have a few of those big ones just to stay in shape. But anyway, once those are set, we will head to the stove and place those over medium-high heat. And then to our strawberries, we will add a little pinch of sugar, plus a splash of some nice cold fresh water. And then last but not least, a couple teaspoons of freshly squeezed lemon juice, which I really should have done through my fingers, since now I have a seed in there, and I don't want a seed in there. But anyway, we'll turn our heat on to medium-high and wait for this to start to simmer. And while we do, we can give that a stir and fish out any seeds. And then what we'll do once it starts to simmer, we will lower our heat to medium, and we will cook this stirring occasionally until our strawberries get soft. Check that. Until our strawberries get softer than soft. And the syrup that's formed starts to thicken up, which is going to take about maybe 15 or 20 minutes. But don't go by time. Go by appearance. And we'll know when we've cooked it long enough, because like I said, our strawberries are going to totally collapse, and those sugary liquids are going to start to thicken up. And if everything goes according to plan, it's going to look something like this. And that's it. Once we're happy with that, we'll pull it off the heat. And we will very carefully pass that through a fine mesh strainer. And to do that, we will take a small ladle or back of a spoon. And we'll just keep stirring and rubbing that stuff around until the only thing we're left with are the seeds and the more fibrous bits. And yes, I could probably pass a little more through, but I want a nice clear syrup, and I don't want to force too much of this into the good stuff. So I'm going to stop right there. And that is pretty much it for our fresh strawberry syrup, which I really would prefer to call syrup. And I'm trying really, really hard not to. And then all we have to do is let this cool, at which point we can wrap it up and keep it in the fridge until we need it. Oh, and most of that foam will dissipate, but if you want, you could skim it off, but that's probably not necessary. So I went ahead and let mine cool and then transferred it into the fridge, at which point it was time to move on to our cornbread pancake batter, which we'll start by mixing together most of our dry ingredients, including some all-purpose flour, to which we will add some white sugar, some baking powder, some baking soda, and of course a little bit of salt. And then we'll take a whisk and give this a quick mix, just to make sure all those ingredients are incorporated. And then once that's been accomplished, we can set that aside until needed. And we can move on to that top secret trick I mentioned in the intro. And for that, we will add buttermilk to a saucepan, which you can definitely find, but if you can't, in the written recipe, we'll include instructions for how to substitute it with milk and lemon juice, which will work almost as good. And then we'll also dump in our cornmeal. And of course, I'm using an artisan, sustainable, organic hipster cornmeal that was ground by hand with reclaimed stones. But really, any cornmeal will work. And then we'll also toss in a couple tablespoons of butter. And we will head to the stove and place this over medium heat. And we'll go ahead and give it a stir with a whisk. And basically, all we need to do here is wait for this to come up to temperature, and for that butter to melt, and for the mixture to start to simmer, which is kind of hard to notice because this is so thick. But anyway, you'll know because everything will start to get hot. And once that happens, we will cook this stirring for 2 minutes. And it's this very simple trick that I heard about from a friend, which is it turns out stole this idea from Cook's Country. And I believe he and they do it in a microwave. But anyway, what happens if you cook the cornmeal for a little bit at this stage? It takes off the raw edge, and those grains of cornmeal start to hydrate and soften, which, as I hope you find out, produces a cornmeal pancake that is not thin, gritty, and dense. So like I said, once that starts to bubble, we will cook it stirring for 2 minutes, at which point it's going to be very thick and look a little something like this. And then what we'll do is pull this off the heat and let it sit and cool for 10 minutes. Since the next thing we're going to do is whisk in 2 eggs, and if our mixture is super hot, we might scramble some of the whites. Probably not, but we could. So we'll let that sit and cool down, at which point, as I just mentioned, we'll go ahead and whisk in 2 eggs. And once those have been incorporated, we'll go ahead and dump in our pre-mixed dry ingredients. And then we will switch to a spatula. And we will spatulate this for about a minute until everything's nicely combined and we produced a very thick but still scoopable batter. And because we're mixing in a saucepan and not in a bowl, make sure you get in there and get in there deep to make sure everything at the bottom is getting mixed in. And that's it. As soon as that's mixed, I'm going to go ahead and clean the spatula off with an ice cream scoop, since that's my favorite tool to use for transferring this batter into a skillet, which, since our strawberry syrup is cooled and our batter's ready, is our next step. And what we'll do is transfer about 1/3 of a cup per pancake into a generously buttered skillet set over medium heat. And I should mention, as the batter sits, it will thicken up a little bit, but I would not necessarily thin it out with water or buttermilk. I would just press these lumps down with the back of a spatula to kind of flatten them out, since I think the wet-dry proportions in this are perfect. And I would hate for you to thin out the batter for nothing. But anyway, we'll cook that first side for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until that outside edge starts to look a little bit dry, and maybe we see a couple bubbles start to poke up through. At which point we'll go ahead and flip these over, being careful not to press them down and flatten them too much. Since, as you can see from a side view, these really do puff up beautifully, which again, for something with this much cornmeal in it, is very impressive. And then while we give that second side about 3 or 4 minutes, one thing I like to do is rotate the pancakes, since I think it might make them cook more evenly, but I can't prove it. But it sounds like something that could be true. Plus, at this point, I really don't have anything else to do. But anyway, you decide. I mean, you guys are after all the drakes of rotating your pancakes. Speaking of which, we started from the batter, now we're here, which is pretty much done as long as these are cooked through. And how you can tell is they'll sort of spring back to the touch. Okay, if they still seem a little bit mushy in the middle, let them cook. In mine, we're feeling just about perfect. And that's it. Once we've decided these are cooked, we'll go ahead and transfer those to a plate, and we will spoon over a generous amount of our fresh strawberry syrup. And sure, maple syrup would also be good with these, but if you go that route, do me a favor and at least slice some strawberries over these, since it really is such a great pairing. And if you're thinking that looks like you're putting on too much, well, I'm not, and I will prove that by adding more later. And we could definitely serve these just like this, but I like to finish mine with a scoop of homemade creme fraiche. Or you could use sour cream. But do yourself a favor and find our homemade creme fraiche recipe, since it's insanely easy and incredibly delicious. And that's it. We'll grab a fork and dig into what I'm claiming are the best cornmeal-based pancakes ever. I mean, these things are so light and tender and fluffy, but at the same time very hearty and satisfying. And I think much more texturally interesting, thanks to the cornmeal, than any regular old pancake. But of course, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, which is why I was never a huge fan of cornmeal pancakes, because that texture of the cornmeal tends to be too gritty and sandy and crunchy. But thanks to that trick we did by partially cooking that cornmeal a little bit before we made the batter, we still get the advantages of the cornmeal without that off-putting grittiness or slightly bitter aftertaste you can get with uncooked cornmeal. So I really do love everything about these. Although there was one issue here. I don't think I put on enough creme fraiche, since I'm pretty much going to use all of it on this first pancake. But that's fine. I'm going to make up for it by spooning over a little more strawberry syrup, which really does soak in. And if I can't see it, it's not there. And yes, any other berry will work, all right? Whether you use blackberry or blueberry or raspberry, that same technique will work just the same. But strawberry just seems to pair best. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling cornbread pancakes with fresh strawberry syrup. Thank you to my anonymous friend and the people he stole that cooking the cornmeal trick from. It really does make a huge difference. And as I've already mentioned like 3 times, I really do think these are some of the best pancakes ever, which is why I really do hope you give these a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.